The story of tax begins where civilization begins, in the first rooms where grain was counted and stored against hunger and war. A levy is laid the moment there is a surplus to harvest, to guard, and to fight over. In the clay ledgers of ancient Mesopotamia, temple scribes pressed streets into wet tablets to record who owed barley to the god and who did not. In the Nile Valley, the pharaoh's officials paced out fields after the flood and converted rising silt into obligations. The earliest receipts for safety and order were paid in grain, cattle, and days of labor. The bill had no signature, only the weight of the crown and the collective fear of chaos. In classical Athens, wealthy citizens financed triremes and festivals in a civic ritual called the liturgy, a tax dressed as honor. In Rome, soldiers were fed, roads were paved, and frontiers were held by tribute flowing to the center. When coffers ran low, emperors sold citizenship and debased coins, learning early the dark art that revenue can be raised with a mint as well as a ledger. The state has always known two voices, one that asks and one that stamps. Across centuries, the chorus rarely changes. Pay and be civilized. Do not and meet the consequences. The question, why pay tax, hides another question, what is the state for? Thomas Hobbes answered that without a common power to keep us in awe, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Jean-Jacques Rousseau countered that legitimate authority comes from a social contract, the freely chosen rules of a people. Tax is a contract written in numbers and blood. It purchases the night watchman and the daylight builder. It buys not only armies and police, but also water pipes, schools and courts where disputes become judgments instead of vendettas. The price of an order tomorrow is collected today. There were times when tax was not coin or paper, but a season taken from your life. Corvée labor, conscription in all but name, demanded days on royal roads and fortress walls. There were years when tax was salt, a pinch made dear by edict. In Bourbon France, the gabelle made the poor choke on the taste of injustice, a grievance that helped set the stage for revolution. In British history, windows were taxed and walls grew blind, bricks were taxed and cottages shrank, newspapers were taxed and information slowed. Every levy is a mirror. It shows what a society values and what it believes it can punish. In the year 1773, a cargo of tea sailed into Boston Harbor with a different sort of freight, an idea that would detonate empires. No taxation without representation became the curse, whispered at a crown that had confused dominion with consent. When Parliament passed the Stamp Act and Townshend duties, it treated the colonies like a cupboard. When colonists dumped tea into salt water, they answered that citizens are not furniture. In a young republic born in 1776, the power to tax was tied to the power to vote. The broom of legitimacy would forever sweep near the cash drawer. Adam Smith, writing in the year 1776, offered 4 canons of taxation that have not grown old. Taxes should be equitable, certain, convenient, and efficient. Equitable, so the burden matches the ability to pay. Certain, so citizens know what they owe and why. Convenient, so the time and manner do not twist the knife. Efficient, so the cost of collecting does not devour the meal. Every modern code either honors these canons or limps because it does not. A good tax system is a clock that keeps time quietly. A bad one is a house with pipes that bang and leak at night. Wars have always been the great tax farmers. In the year 1942, the United States introduced mass payroll withholding to finance total war, making the state a silent partner in every paycheck. In the middle of the 20th century, the top marginal rate in America climbed above 9/10, an extraordinary lever applied in extraordinary times. Britain funded victories and defeats with consoles and high rates, learning that debt and tax are twins that quarrel but cannot live apart. John Maynard Keynes taught governments to tax and spend against the cold wind of recessions and to build surpluses in fair weather. Milton Friedman warned that people spend other people's money with a looser hand, and that taxes can strangle innovation if the hand tightens too far. The debate persists like the tide, advancing and retreating, never leaving the shore. The 20th century also discovered that taxes can correct as well as collect. Arthur Pigou proposed levies that price the harm we inflict on each other. A tax on smoke is a bill to the chimney for the lungs it stains. In our era, a carbon price is a policy that turns the sky into an invoice, an accounting for heat and flood sent to producers and consumers of emissions. Sweden, Canada, and other countries have experimented with these tools, marrying economics to physics in a grim wedding of necessity. When markets ignore costs that nature cannot, tax can place the missing weight on the scale. If tax funds the Commonwealth, why do people complain? Start with psychology. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed that losses sting roughly twice as much as equal gains please. Every tax day is presented by the brain as a cut, not a contribution. Add salience. When a levy is visible at the register, it feels like a fresh wound. When it is withheld in tidy slices from wages, it grows quieter, like a low hum behind the walls. Raj Chetty and colleagues demonstrated that when taxes are made more visible, behavior changes. People spend differently, compliance moves. The mind is not a neutral calculator, it is a creature of fairness and pain. Then there's tax morale. Citizens comply more willingly when they believe the system is honest and the proceeds are well spent. Corruption is a moth that eats the flag from the inside out. Manco Olson described how special interests can capture the machinery of policy, turning taxes into tribute for the well-connected. James Buchanan and public choice economists warn that governments, like private actors, respond to incentives that bureaucracies grow and programs persist, because people and budgets prefer security to sunset. Trust, once drained, is costly to refill. Every scandal is a receipt for cynicism. The law is a lever, yet even the strongest lever faces ingenuity. Tax avoidance is the art of walking to the edge and not falling. Tax evasion is the shove. Al Capone could not be caged for blood, so the state found a trail of unpaid accounts and shut the door. Leona Helmsley, accused of treating taxes as obligations for little people, became a cautionary tale about hubris. In more recent decades, multinational companies engineered profit to flow through the narrow streets of low-rate jurisdictions, arranging transactions like mirrors to reflect income where the sun is kindest. Apple, Google, Amazon and Starbucks each found themselves in the public dock over arrangements that were legal and unpopular at the same time. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development designed a project against base erosion and profit shifting, a long name for a simple goal: to make tax follow substance rather than smoke. It is difficult work. Money moves faster than parliaments do. The social ledger records the benefits alongside the grievances. Tax built canals, railways and airports where private capital would not go first. It funded vaccination campaigns that turned deadly childhoods into survivable ones. It paid teachers who transformed farmhands into engineers and nurses into clinicians. The Scandinavian model, admired and critiqued in equal measure, traded high taxes for broad social insurance and efficient administration. Critics ask about growth and dynamism. Supporters answer with longevity, education and trust. There is no perfect model. There are only chosen balances, each with a different rhythm. Some taxes are born unpopular and stay that way. The poll tax in late 20th century Britain attempted simplicity and landed on perceived unfairness, charging the same bill to mansions and bedsits. The street supplied their answer. Value-added tax, first born in France. Spread across the globe because it is difficult to dodge and efficient to collect, yet it falls on consumption and therefore raises questions about the burden on the poor. Property tax funds, schools and fire brigades. Yet in cities where values surge, it can evict the elderly on fixed incomes. Every instrument leaves fingerprints. Economists speak of incidence, the true bearer of a tax burden after markets adjust. A levy on employers can land on workers through lower wages. A tariff on imports can be paid by domestic consumers through higher prices. Elasticities, those quiet measurements of response, decide who ultimately pays. Arnold Harburger drew triangles on chalkboards to illustrate the deadweight loss from taxes that distort choices. The lesson is clinical and unsettling. Raise revenue, and you will bend behavior. The task is to bend it as little as possible, or, in the wiser cases, to bend it toward better outcomes. History offers a gallery of righteous fury aimed at taxes used as whips. The salt law in colonial India was a grain of sand that tore the skin of legitimacy. Mohandas Gandhi walked to the sea in 1930 and lifted salt from water to say that the state had overreached. In France before the revolution, the Gebel and the web of exemptions for the well-born taught a nation to distrust its own government. In the present day, the Panama Papers and Pandora Papers revealed how elites of many countries used secrecy to float above the tax net, while funding shortfalls fell below upon ordinary shoulders. The public's complaint is not simply that the bill is large, it is that the table is uneven. Still, the idea of tax has also pulled entire societies upward. After the Second World War, progressive taxation and broad social investment supported a generation of middle-class prosperity in the United States and Western Europe. The American interstate highway system, financed largely by fuel taxes, stitched together regional markets into a continental economy. The National Health Service in Britain became a civic treasure, paid from a common purse. These are not the stories of perfect efficiency. They are the stories of collective choice, where the majority judged that certain goods should be bought together or not at all. The modern quarrel often turns on the border between the treasury and the soul. When taxes rise to support programs some citizens do not value, resentment blooms. When taxes fall and public services decay, a different resentment grows. Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman have documented how wealth and income concentrate when the tax system loses progressivity or enforcement weakens. Others fire back that punitive rates dull ambition, that entrepreneurs build fewer factories when the state demands too much of their success. The truth is, neither side holds the whole answer, because people are not columns in a spreadsheet. They respond to meaning, to stories about fairness, about contribution, about whether the rules are the same for everyone. There's also the nagging arithmetic of time. Demographics shift, populations age, and the promises made to retirees bloom in cost. Healthcare advances, and the price of life lengthens. Infrastructure ages, and the bill for repairs lands in a decade that prefers novelty to maintenance. Governments face a temptation as old as coinage, to borrow forward and leave the tax to some later parliament. Debt can be wise when growth outpaces interest, and reckless when it does not. The difference between prudence and folly is not always visible in the first years. It becomes stark when the interest bill competes with the school and the hospital for the same tax pound. If tax is necessary, can it be beautiful? Beauty in taxation is not ornament. It is clarity, simplicity, and a felt sense of justice. The system works best when the citizen can answer three questions with confidence. What do I owe? How do I pay? What do we buy? The more the answers are tangled, the more evasion and misery creep in. Countries that invest in competent revenue services collect more with less bitterness. Countries that treat taxpayers as adversaries collect less with more rage. Trust is not a line item in a budget, yet it is the highest yielding asset the state can accumulate. Complaints will never cease, nor should they. Complaint is a civic sense organ. It detects waste, cruelty, and privilege. It warns when taxes become weapons rather than tools. It also misfires, turning healthy skepticism into corrosive refusal. The task of a mature society is to listen to complaint without being ruled by it, and to defend the shared goods purchased with shared sacrifice. To argue about tax is to argue about the kind of country we want. The argument is the point. Why pay tax? Because armies and markets, vaccines and bridges, courts and clean water do not appear by magic. Because the miracle of strangers cooperating depends on promises enforced beyond any one person's power. Because every generation inherits roads it did not pave and schools it did not build, and owes something to the next who will inherit from it. What is tax for? It is for the space between private ambition and public peace. A space only governments can keep safe and only citizens can keep honest. Has the idea done good or harm? It has done both. And it will continue to do both, for as long as we live together and count together. There's a final tension that never resolves. The state asks for money with the voice of necessity, and the citizen hears it with the ears of liberty. Between those voices lies a negotiation performed anew every year, in parliaments and newspapers, at kitchen tables and in courtrooms. The negotiation is messy, slow, and often infuriating, yet it is better than the alternatives. A country without taxes is not a paradise of freedom. It is a bad dream of private tolls, of feuding strongmen, of services sold only to those who can pay at the door. A country with taxes but without consent is a different nightmare. The road out of both dreams is narrow, and it is paved with receipts. So people complain. Of course they do. They complain when the bill arrives, when the service fails, when the neighbor cheats, when the rich glide, when the poor suffer, when reform is promised and postponed. They complain because the balance is delicate, because nothing touches both the wallet and the conscience more directly than a tax. In the oldest records, in the newest protocols, in the hands of emperors and elected officials alike, tax has been a dangerous instrument that can play a hymn or a dirge. The music depends on who holds it and why. The history continues to write itself. Digital platforms challenge borders. Cryptocurrencies test the perimeter of enforceability. Global agreements struggle to keep pace with corporate architectures that exist on paper across oceans. The future will demand choices. Will we price carbon that warms the air we all breathe? Will we fund the invisible defenses against the next pathogen? Will we mend the bridges that carry the freight of trade? These are not questions a market can fully answer, because no private actor owns the atmosphere, the herd immunity, or the river. Only the public can buy them, which is to say, only taxpayers can. There is an image worth keeping. A ledger, yes, but also a lighthouse. Taxes are the dews that keep the light on. Ships curse the fee when skies are clear. They bless it when the weather turns black and the rocks grow close. The trick, ancient and modern alike, is to charge enough to keep the beacon strong, and never so much that the fleet refuses to sail. Between those extremes lies the channel that every serious nation must navigate, year after year, budget after budget, argument after argument. A people that can steer there, with discipline and generosity, turns the old fear of tribute into the older hope of a commonwealth.